Hey guys, and welcome back to another video about me talking about my studies. So, my name's Ethan, and today I'll be taking you through my study on the Sicilian defense. So, here we go. The introduction. In this study, we are going to explore some of the key variations of the Sicilian defense. C5. A very common response to e4, and it is used by the most top-level players. The Sicilian is an excellent way to play with the black pieces against e4, but there are quite few variations you need to know about. So the first move from white will be e4. E4, which is also called the king's pawn opening, is white's first move in the Sicilian. Now, this is the Sicilian defense. In this study, we are going to explore the main and most common variations played by black. If you like this study, please press the heart below and also click the subscribe and like button, please. So the next chapter is the open Sicilian. So these are the moves of the open Sicilian, which are e4, c5, then knight to f3, d6, d4, then of course black captures, then knight captures back, and then knight develops on f6, and then knight goes to c3. This is like the most common opening for the Sicilian, and it's also in all the variations. So next chapter, the closed Sicilian. Then e4, c5, knight to c3. When white moves knight to c3, the variation is called the closed Sicilian. It is useful for players who prefer less attacking and more closed positions as white. So the next move will be a developing move, which is knight to c6. And then there's also another variation move, which is d6 instead of knight to c6. But it's better to play knight to c6 as you're developing your pieces. Then pawn moves to g3, which allows you to fianchetto your bishop and also develop more pieces. So g6, also allowing black to fianchetto his bishop. Then now we fianchetto our bishop by moving a bishop to g2, and then black does the same. So we move pawn to d3, then d6, and then bishop to e3, then pawn to e6, and then there's another move you could play, which is rook to b8, and then after e6 you can play knight to d2, which is a good move. So you can actually attack the queen, but he would actually block it. And there's another move you can play. It's f4. Then after that move, you can play knight. He'll play knight to d4. Then queen d2 after that. Then black's queen will move to a5. Then white's knight will develop on h3, since white does not want to trade pieces with black, because then black would have a better position, and also black would and white would have a very close position. Then h5. So moving on back to queen to d2, another move you could play is rook to b8, which was here actually a few moves ago. And then we could play knight to e2. So knight to d4 is black's response. Then here you have to castle, short castle. Then knight to e7, and then bishop to h6. As if black's bishop captures, then the queen can capture black's bishop and be attacking on the king's side. So black also castles, and this is the end of the closed Sicilian. This is mostly played by top level players and the people who are over 1000 ranking. So let's go on to the next chapter, the Najdorf variation. For this video, I'll be doing the Najdorf variation and the dragon variation. Part 2 will be coming soon in a few days. So this chapter is about the Najdorf variation, of course, a very common and strong variation used by players at all levels. So first move e4, c5, then knight to f3. This is like the open Sicilian, which is mostly the opening for all the variations of the Sicilian. So d6, then we trade a pawn, and then knight to f6, and this is the open Sicilian. That is why it's called the open Sicilian, because this is to open up your pieces for more development, and this is the openings for almost all the variations of the Sicilian. So these are just simple developing moves. Then C. This move that black plays is a good move because, well, you can target the king when you move your bishop to b5. You could also move your knight to b5 and then your other knight too. So that will be fatal to black. So that's why black played this move. So this strange looking move is very important. It prevents the knights to move in b5. And also, it prevents the bishop to check the king. It allows b5 to be played, which is a better move too. And here is a move that is good. Then bishop to g5. So there's actually another move you could actually play, which is bishop to e3, because this is the old main line. So after that is e5, which is obviously attacking the knight, and then the knight would move away to b3, then attacks the knight again, then f3, which prevents the knight from going to knight to g4, and this also prevents the rook from going to c8. I mean, why would they play that? Because the rook is not able to capture the pawn. Next is the queen goes to d2, which protects the knight, of course. Then b5, then a3. So if he tries to attack a knight, we'll just capture. So going back to bishop to g5, after that move is e6. Whites are putting pressure on the king's side. f4, bishop to e7, protecting the knight. Queen to f3, getting ready to castle queen side. Then queen goes to b6, which is targeting the knight, not only the knight, but also your pawn. So there's one variation move you could also play. He could also play queen to c7. Then you could move to queen side. Then is knight to d7. Then g4, b5. Then we finally captured the knight, releasing the pressure. Then knight captures back. Then g5 attacks the knight. Knight goes back to d7. Then f5, preparing to trade for the pawns. But bishop takes on g5, which also results in a check. Then king goes to b1. Now, this is where black starts to get a little aggressive. They start to attack the queen, and you can't even go here because of this, and we can't go here because of our knight, and we can't even go here. So we have to go on the bottom layer. Then queen to h5 we can go to, and queen to e7, protecting the bishop. So after this, after queen to b6, which is the main line, that one it is castling. Castling, yeah. See this. It's perfectly lined up. The rook is protecting the knight, and then the king is protecting the pawn. What a lovely duo. Then knight to d7. After that, white plays h4, then h6. Where will the bishop go? Of course, the bishop will capture. He won't capture the pawn, which is a stupid move, but he'll capture the knight. Then bishop captures again. So we're moving on to the next chapter and the last chapter for this part. So this is the dragon variation. This chapter will go over the dragon variation, a very common variation used by black, and it is the most aggressive variation in the Sicilian defense. So e4, c5, knight to f3. So simple developing move to control the d4 square. d6. So this is about to get into the open Sicilian. It is also blocking the knight from going to e5 and is controlling the e5 square. You could also play e6, then d4, which is a good move by white because she is also controlling the center. Then he captures, knight captures. Then this is like almost like the open Sicilian, but instead of moving the d pawn, you move the e pawn. So e5. Then there's also another variation move you can play, also move the knight, but you can also play queen to a5, check. Then d4 after d6. Whites want to exchange the pawns, so captures, capture. Now whites are now ahead in development, but the blacks still have the two central pawns, whereas the whites only one. So this is targeting the pawn, the knight. Then blacks are now developing their knight and threatening the e4 pawn. Then we strengthen the pawn by moving our knight to c3. The e4 pawn is now protected by the c3 knight. So g6. This is the dragon variation. g6 allows the dark squared bishop to develop and move to g7, which is also called the fianchetto, controlling the long dark squared diagonal. So after that move, you play bishop to e3. There are many moves you can do here. Pawn moves to f3, pawn moves to g4, then to g5, pawn moves to h4, queen moves up to d2, allowing the king to castle. And yeah, that's most of the things you can do. One of the variations, instead of moving to e3, which is e2 by the white bishop, after that moving the black bishop to fianchetto, then castling, and then knight goes to c8. Then here, which is also this same move but in later steps. Then black also castles, knight goes back to b3, then a6, which blocks the bishop from going to b5 and also prepares b5, pawn to b5, and starts to threaten the knight. Or you can play f3, then knight will capture this. Then we capture the knight over here. Then queen to b6 plus check. Then king moves to h1. And then look at this. It's a fork, but we can actually capture. Then the b pawn captures on c6. We're going back to the move bishop to e3 and bishop to g7, fianchettoing the bishop. Here also there is another variation move you could play, which is this. The knight goes to g4. Then white goes to b5, with checking the king. And then, of course, the knight will go here, c6. Then we capture. You know what happens next? Captures, and then it's a fork. We'll have to capture the knight. I mean the rook. After that, it's f3, which after g7, which allows these pawns to go to g4, g5, and h4. The key opening moves for white, who attempt to castle queenside, whereas f3 strengthens the pawn structure, connecting e4 to h2 and g2, while white also plans pushing to g4 and possibly h4. So after f3, we will have to move to castle. Then you can also use h5, which is operating against g4, because if you play this move, then captures. Then after castling, you play queen to d2. You're trying to attack this bishop, and if this bishop captures, when you move the bishop to h6, you will be in a checkmate position, and also allows the king to castle queenside. Then knight goes to c6, pawn goes to g4, bishop to e6, knight captures on e6, f captures on e6, and now the rook has a powerful open file. Then we can finally castle queenside, and then after that we move our the blacks move their knight to e5. Then the bishop goes to e2, protecting the pawn. Not only that, but allowing the rooks to protect each other. Then after that, queen plays c8, which is looking at the king. And after that, you play h4. You could technically play g5 after this, but that's all the time I have for today. So, bye guys. Part 2 is coming soon in a few days. And peace.